Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from Rock and Roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded in St. Louis, Missouri, now here's your host, Aaron Perlett of Atomic Junk Shop.
Welcome back to the Loadout Music Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aaron Perlett, and today we are joined by rising blues rock artist Joanne Shaw Taylor, who has a terrific new album out June 7. Joanne, thanks so much for being on the show with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So you were, you're originally from the UK, and you were kind of forgive the term, and I'm sure it gets a little old for you, kind of a child prodigy to some degree, and somehow stumbled into a relationship with Dave Stewart, right?
Pretty much. I can't say child prodigy. It makes me sound like some sort of virtuoso Japanese violinist or something. I was, compared to my school friends, yes, I was quite good, but no, I wasn't exceptionally gifted or anything really. But I met Dave when I was 16 and left school, and here we are 23 years later.
Yeah, is that I imagine that comes with a unique set of pressures when you're that young and someone with cachet of Dave's takes you under his wing, and you start traveling the world, and I'm sure he's trying to help you build relationships, find your style. But I imagine there's a unique pressure that probably a lot of people can't even relate to.
To be honest, I think because I was so young,
Yeah.
and when you're 15, 16 and nothing really bad's happened to you, then you just assume you're good and not in an egotistical way, but just life hasn't sort of taught you otherwise or knocked a little bit of the stuffing out of you.
Yeah.
I think I'm thankful that I was that young. I think if I'd have been 26, or older, I probably would have been understood the gravity of the situation. Whereas, when you're 16, I didn't really know who Dave was. I hadn't listened to the Eurythmics. I grew up listening to the Spice Girls. I was raised in the 90s in a village in England. So it was just, to be honest, I think in my tiny idiot brain, it was, oh, well, cool. I don't have to go to school anymore.
Yeah.
So I think I was very lucky. Again, if I'd have done that in my 30s, I probably would have been very, very nervous.
So take me back before that. What got you to that point? You're very young, and obviously people were seeing a tremendous amount of talent, both from the guitar perspective, but also vocally. Where did your music journey begin for you? What kind of got you on that track?
For me, the kind of aha moment was I watched the Stevie Wonder DVD. And I'd already been playing classical guitar at school, and I'd passed an audition for the Birmingham Youth Ensemble, so I'd sort of been traveling around the country performing with them. So I knew I could play guitar, but I couldn't say I was madly in love with classical guitar as an 8-year-old. So I discovered Stevie, and it was just, I knew I could play guitar. I knew I wanted to play guitar, and here comes this guy that plays so beautifully and has a great amount of technical ability, but the songs like Pride and Joy, Love Struck Baby. I always say Stevie was the perfect gateway blues artist for my generation because they were kind of like really great pop songs. Love Struck Baby, it's 3.5 minutes and super catchy. But also this guitar player that, the tone is so beautiful. And, once I got into him and his influences, realized, for a genre that has its limits or limits put upon it, there are so many differences. Steve is a great example. His brother is also Jimmy Vaughan, a professional blues guitarist. And that's two guys raised in the same household who share DNA with the same parents and are two very different guitarists within the same genre. So, you could put so much of your own personality into it, which I think is really what sort of started me off. So yeah, it was Stevie. And from there it was, all right, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. And I found the connectivity with Dave Stewart to be so interesting because he's really seen as a composer that leans on synth instruments so much. Even if you go back to Tom Petty's I believe it's a Southern Accents album, Don't Come Around Here No More.
Mm.
It's such a unique song in the Tom Petty repertoire. Um, and then when I learned that he had written it with Dave Stewart, you're like, now I get it. And that's why Dave Stewart was in that infamous video, but it made sense. So I found it fascinating that he had become one of your early mentors, and that he just seems to come from a completely different place than when I listen to the breadth of your music.
Yeah, I think that's been instrumental in why I've turned out to be the artist I am. I was saying I'm a blues guitarist that's a soul singer that likes writing pop songs. And I think at the end of the day, I'm really a songwriter that happens to play guitar and be able to sing those songs. Um, and I think that comes from Dave. I mean, Dave started because he was a fan of Robert Johnson. He was really into blues, what we would consider country Delta blues. But took that and followed, whatever he wanted to do, and ended up, getting a bank loan and buying a bunch of synthesizers and creating the Taurus and the Eurythmics. So, it was kind of it showed me that just because that's your first influence doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the artist you end up being. So I think that was quite an interesting connection to make for me, given I also am someone who started being a blues guitar fan, but, I haven't necessarily stayed true to being a blues artist.
And it's interesting that you think of yourself as writing pop songs, because I listen to your music, and aside from hearing some tones of, say, like Joss Stone in your voice, and I say that with great reverence, uh to me it kind of this pure blues rock with your voice is so soulful. And it to a degree, but I guess I never make that equation with with pop, but I hear the blues and I hear the rock, and but it's fascinating that's how you are thinking about kind of what you're crafting.
I think there's some elements of pop in it. I mean, it's always, I never know what to say really, because I think I never want to offend anyone. That's probably the Britishness in me, and I don't want to say I'm a blues artist when if you listen to me and then put on Muddy Waters, we're two very different artists, and it does tend to be a genre blues that people are very protective of, myself included. I'm a massive blues fan at the end of the day. So I think I just worry that it's, I think there's definitely blues in there because that's how I taught myself to understand music, was from the aspect of blues. So that's always going to have a feel over everything I perform. Um, even when I sang Summertime, I think I sang it as a blues artist, but it's not necessarily a blues song. So I think that's why I always try to, it's not that I have any negative feelings about being labeled a blues artist. I'm just not sure it's fair on people expecting a traditional blues album and then buying one of mine.
Yeah, and these, because of what's happened with radio over the past 20-25 years, I mean, the idea of labels have just kind of faded away anyhow. I mean, the only artists that I can there's a couple that I could think about, comparing you to today, from a contemporary standpoint, and that's, another one of your mentors, Joe Bonamassa, obviously, who's, one of the absolute kings of modern day blues guitar, but also even the Sisters of Larkin Poe,
Hmm.
and I mean, it seems like you're going down very similar paths. They come from more of a, kind of a Southern American roots, but very bluesy guitars, really strong vocals, and uh, do you find that comparison gets stuck on you much between you and Larkin Poe, and maybe solely because you're a female and you've got two female singers there, or do you feel like there's some credibility in that comparative?
Um, I mean, I think people still tend to like to compare women, don't they? I mean, I get compared to Sam Fish a lot, who's a very, very good friend of mine, and I adore her music and her personally. But I think for two people, I think we're very different artists. But at the end of the day, I think all of us, Larkin Poe included, have come up with a lot of the same influences. So I think we're gonna get compared. Um, and I'm sure there's bits in there. I think probably Johnny Lang would have been probably the most one I would have compared myself to, and was a big influence growing up. But I'm also the worst of, I don't know what's wrong with my ears that I'll be like, oh, I wrote like a really good blues song. And someone's like, yeah, that sounds like acid jazz. That's not a blues song, Joanne. I don't think I've got, the right pair of ears to be involved in that conversation.
You know what? I do the same thing musically when I'm writing music, and I think it sounds like A, and I think the band that most people that I've never said anything to have compared us to, like the Drive-By Truckers.
Hmm.
I'm humbled by that comparison, but I would have never thought to myself, that's who I'm writing music like, the Drive-By Truckers. So
It's funny that I'll write a song sometimes. I'm like, oh, it's like an Adele ballad. And then like I'll play it to a producer and be like, oh, it's like a Peter Gabriel song. I'm like, what? Both great, but I just wasn't what I was hearing.
Now the new record, Heavy Soul, you've had such success with like Reckless Heart and the Blues album that had, I think the Blues album reached #1 on the Billboard Blues charts.
Thanks.
But this album you've got Kevin Shirley's producing it, and he's worked with the Black Crowes and Journey and Aerosmith and a lot of folks and Joe. Um, what was is this your ninth or 10th studio album?
This is my ninth, I believe.
Okay. So what was different about this time around? Because I mean the early returns on this record have been glowingly positive.
They have, which is, absolutely lovely. Um, I mean, different in this time around, you mean working with Kevin?
Yeah, just I mean, how is this record different from say the ones before it?
I mean, I always try and approach it that, um, I always say when I look back on my catalogue of work, hopefully when I'm 170 years old, finally retiring, that, I want every album to be different because I don't want to repeat myself. It's boring, and I love that if you really love White Sugar, then that's still there for you to listen to, but if I can make White Sugar better, I wouldn't have recorded White Sugar. I would have waited till I could make it better. So I kind of want every album to be different because I'm different. Joanne at 39 isn't the same Joanne at 22. I've got to evolve personally and musically, but when I look back, I want them all to sound like the same artist. So that's always my main challenge that I set myself of, okay, who am I? Because an album really is it's 2 weeks out of the year. It's a snapshot of your life. And, I could have taken the songs I wrote for Heavy Soul, and if I'd have recorded them a month later, it probably still would have sounded different than the songs that we have. Just because you're in a different mind frame or, whatever. So the main musical challenge for me is, okay, one, I want the best songs. I want them to be good songs. I don't want any filler. Which songs have I written that I think are the best? And thirdly, does this challenge me? But does it also sound like me? I'm not going to suddenly put out a rockabilly album.
Yeah,
Say,
yeah.
And also, how do I keep that fresh for myself? How do I keep reinventing the same wheel, I suppose? How do I do another Joanne album that still sounds like me, but is something fresh that I haven't already put out? Else I may as well not put it out. I may as well just tell you to save your money and keep listening to the other albums.
For those who haven't composed music or an album, how do you do that? How do you ensure that you are different? You mentioned White Sugar, which for those who don't know, was your debut album in 2009. But how do you make sure that you're differentiating yourself beyond the narratives you're sharing within a lyric? How do you do that instrumentally from a composition standpoint as an artist?
Well, I mean, my main thing has always been to not overthink it, really. I mean, if it feels good to you, it's probably good, and I could sit there and I think the problem is when you sit there and go, okay, I've got to come up with something new, so I have to try new things. I think you start to overthink it and you're going to end up with something that you're not happy with, and therefore people listening to it, if you don't believe in it, they're not going to enjoy it. So I think the main challenge is, how do I find something that melodically feels good to me? And like I've written, I'll write a piece of music and then I'll go for a walk and listen to it and go, okay, yeah, I really want to hear this. I want to be able to enjoy this song. I'm going to finish writing it. I think lyrically for me, the bigger challenge is, I mean, because songwriting is it's me expressing myself and dealing with things. It's free therapy. It's me sitting down and going through a relationship that something still bugs me, or something about myself that bugs me, or the, loss of my mom, or And those things have been happening for years and years, and I'm still writing songs about them. But what's fresh about it? And that's really just age. You know, I'm 39 and I feel it's been 10 years, for example, since I lost my mom, and the grief isn't the same 10 years on that it was at the get-go. And I don't feel the same way about relationships I've ended now that I did when they were happening. You know, the benefit of hindsight and the time to kind of look at things. So again, that's the main challenge for me, rather than just sitting down and going, how do I write a new chord change that didn't exist before? It's how do I express myself and be truthful with it, you know?
So talk about we were talking before earlier about when you originally you were living in, once you came to the US, you were living in Detroit for a number of years. Now you're living in Nashville. And you had mentioned, I thought it was kind of interesting, that you want to be there because that's kind of where the music industry is happening. And it is fascinating what a music machine has been created there, arguably stronger and more durable than anywhere in the United States. What was it that drew you to, you've been there a couple of years, to go to Nashville? What has it been like since you've been there, in terms of differentiating from Detroit where you were before?
I think the main thing, the biggest difference to me is that Detroit was always like a safe haven. You know, my friends there, most were in the industry or musicians, you know, band members, or like Al Sutton, who was produced Reckless Heart for me. But it was always a safe haven that I could go off the road and kind of really relax. And this is the same, but I think now I'm in a point in my career where I'm just so focused and I don't want to say work obsessed, but I think that's after COVID and having such a long break, that it's so nice to be somewhere off the road where I can still work and be inspired and be in a studio or go to a meeting with my manager or see Joe. Joe's here. So it's just a really inspiring place to be, to see all these people who are so driven and driven creatively as well. You know, I'm at RCA Studios right now, and Dave Cobb's here. The Greta Boys are sometimes here, who I know well from them being kids in Michigan. So there's just always someone around to inspire you, which is, you know, very much needed for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, we've had John Oates from Hall & Oates on the show a couple times, and
Yeah.
he moved to Nashville, I want to say about 10 years ago from Colorado. And I remember him, I'll never forget this. He was talking to me about how the the day-to-day musicianship in Nashville is so impressive that he had to improve the quality of his playing, his guitar playing. He had to improve his chops because he felt like there were so many good guitarists and musicians around him. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, this is a Rock Hall of Famer who is telling me this, and it made an impression on me. So have you found that you're able to find contributors there that are just really where you want them to be in terms of people that participate with you, whether it's touring, whether it's recording, or what have you?
Yeah, definitely in the studio. I mean, the band we use for Heavy Soul, I mean, Rob McNally, Audley Freed, Doug Allison Presswood, you know, the caliber of musicianship here. I mean, it's such, you know, it's such a treat to be able to write a song and hear it in your head and then hand it over to these expert musicians who can bring it to life in a way that you didn't think possible. But and on the flip side of that, like the lovely Mr. Oates was saying, you know, that pushes me as a songwriter. It's my job to write better songs that really warrant this level of musicianship, you know. So it's there's definitely pardon the French, as we say in England, there's plenty of things to give me a kick up the bum here.
Yeah, I know. Didn't I believe Jimmy Wallace also spent some time with you in
Yes.
studio? Um, and I took note of it because largely because he actually laid keys on our last record that we just released. He's an exceptional
He,
pianist.
he's a monster, such a great guy too. And that's always a bit of a which forgive me, Jimmy, for not mentioning you.
I'm gonna make sure he knows.
Yeah, I'll apologize. I'll text him now.
He's gonna be like, "Who the hell's
But
that guy?" I don't even know. I just
he that was a bit of a, you know, hero moment for me because he played with Kenny Wayne Shepherd, obviously. when I was still a kid and kind of listening to it. And so it was a name, back in the early years when you read everything in an album cover, want to know who mixed it, where it's recorded, who are these musicians. So that was a name on my bucket list. And yeah, he did the live PBS thing with us, and absolutely brilliant player, singer too, and just an all-round really lovely guy to work with.
Yeah, I know that we overdubbed his work on our record, and I heard it before it went to him and then after. And after he was done with it, I thought to myself, this record is so much better now that he has his fingerprints on it. It just added this, I don't know, it just fleshed out the music and just gave it another layer that was so important.
He's my favorite guy to work with. I absolutely adore him. But also, I mean, again, humble, it's like I wrote the keyboard part for Sweet Little Lies, just that little riff. And like he would let me sit him down and play it to him. I'm like, Jimmy, I'm sure like I can't play piano. So the idea that somebody as good as Jimmy Wallace knew it was important to me to have this on it because it's my song. I mean, it's just that level of, everyone I've worked with here has just been absolutely astounding, but also just genuinely brilliant to work with.
Now, is that how you write? Do you write all the individual parts for the most part, or at least have a vision or a tone in your head that says, this is how I want the drums, this is how I want the bass to feel on the low end, or does it depend on the instrument?
It depends on the song, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, there are songs, the slightly more pop songs like, so on this album, okay, Sweet Little Lies, I think I did all the guitar parts, I did the keys part. I put down a kind of a rough idea of what I wanted on bass. And then Heavy Soul as well, because I wanted the drum pattern to change to sort of it to be sort of gospel-y on the choruses, but more sparse in the verses. So there's some songs you have definite ideas of like, hey, can we try this? Because I can't hear it any other way in my head. So can we at least go? And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And then there are some songs that you just write you an acoustic and like, hey, give me some options. How are you guys hearing it? Which is also the fun of being in the studio. You don't want to. I think it'd be a bit miserable for me if I went in with every song it had to be this way, and if it didn't do it, it would ruin things for me. It's nice to have the feedback with guys who play instruments far better than I do.
So you're not a control freak, just every once in a while.
Yeah, I'm a specific control freak.
Yeah. All right. So I know you just got off the road of like 2 months straight of, I mean, I looked at your tour schedule. It was pretty insane from in April and May. The album is out June 7th. What happens after that? What does the rest of the year look like for you?
Well, I've actually just recorded another new album when I got off the road. So we've got Heavy Soul out now, but there's another one in the can. We're going out. We got a couple of weeks in Europe, a couple of weeks here, kind of fly out festival season, which is always good fun. It's kind of like a busman's holiday, as we say. You're doing the same thing, but it's different. And then we're into some pretty heavy fall tour for Heavy Soul that starts in October. And that pretty much takes me to Christmas, which I will finally sit down and have a rest and watch Harry Potter with Hank.
You and your dog.
Yeah.
All right, Joanne Shaw Taylor, thank you so much for being with us today. Good luck on Heavy Soul. It is a phenomenal record, and with all your touring, sounds like you've got a busy remainder of 2024.
Pretty much, but that's how I like it. So yeah, there's no complaints from me.
Keeps the brain waves firing.
Yeah, it stops me overthinking. If I don't have time to think.
Yeah.
Thanks
so much for being on the show, Joanne.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. Be well.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, hosted by Atomic Junkshot frontman Aaron Perlett. Find all of our episodes and more at loadoutmusic.com.